Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 18, Jazz Trumpeter John Swana.
Yeah, so John, I found your stuff because Eric showed me your, was it Bandcamp?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so he's like, you got to check some of this stuff out. And I think part of the reason was Eric and I had a conversation about, the importance of learning licks or the importance of learning little etudes so you can learn how to hear playing over changes better. And I was making this claim that just knowing how to play over a 2-chord, over a 1-chord, that's not enough. You need to learn stuff that goes through the chord changes to get it inside your ear to really start flying over tunes. And I was making this argument that learning licks is great. And even further than that, learning whole etudes even. And, we know so many great jazz musicians have done that. And then at some point, I think it was right near that conversation, Eric was like, well, check this stuff out. And it was your giant steps exercises. And obviously from what I hear, you're a great musician. I've listened to some of your recordings and stuff, but I thought it'd be cool for us to have a conversation about how you approach now, or how you have approached learning to play over changes and learning to play over tunes, just from a jazz musician's perspective.
Yeah, I can hear myself better with one of these out. But for me, starting on trumpet, I always felt like I had to play specific ideas, because if you don't play specific ideas, you sound kind of lame on trumpet. Because if you don't hear it, you're going to be kind of sounding. You can't just play a note; you got to hear it. You know what I mean? Because of the partials of the trumpet. So when I started learning jazz, I learned it from a high school buddy who was ahead of me, who was a sax player, a guy named Glenn Guidone, and he was, the first time I saw the guys play without music, I was amazed. I was like, wow, you can do that? And so we'd get together and play. And I remember he used to make fun of me because I would play real basic stuff, because he could kind of move around in it more. One, because he was more advanced, but two, because I think the nature of the saxophone, you can move around. So I just learned at the beginning very specific stuff, because especially once you get above concert F, above the staff, you definitely have to hear the notes or you're going to be on the wrong partial. So I was always in that kind of camp of thinking in that way. So I definitely was into licks because I liked, the jazz guys, Miles Davis, Freddie Hubbard, Kenny Dorham. I used to have the argument, actually, Eric, with Jim Holton about licks and not licks. He was saying you don't need to learn licks. And I was saying, yeah, you can not learn licks. You can play if you're playing all the time. And I think if you're maybe at a super advanced level of ability, you can just kind of, just from playing, if you're like a prodigy playing since you were 3, you can probably get away with not doing that as much because you're hearing so much and everything's so natural to you. But and Jim was saying you don't have to learn licks, but piano, you can also get away with outlining the chord in your solo. So what happens to me is, if you're going to go that route, then you're not going to have any strong melodic phrases that have good voice leading, because you haven't worked on that to do that. So we used to have that argument. And anyway, I came up like that. So once I got my Evie, the electronic thing I play,
You let me borrow that for a weekend, man. It was a blast. I didn't get very far.
Oh, is that the same? There was some guy.
It was an early model.
Yeah. Some guy you were living with, maybe you were living with or friends with, that took it apart. I was like scared. He took it apart in front of me. I was like, oh my! But he knew what he was doing. Okay. I forget who it was, but
I wouldn't do that.
But when I got that, I could all of a sudden I could play without, one, I could think of an idea and finger it and it would come out. 2, I could play without getting tired. So that helped me a lot to play the Evie. And it was early computer, so I would make sequences. I had a Commodore Amiga, You remember the Commodores?
Mm-hmm.
And I would program tunes in 12 keys with bass line and hi-hat click and just play through things in 12 keys. Not worrying about trying to play licks, just play through it. And that helped a lot too. But all the while, I'm grabbing my favorite stuff from my favorite players.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember that's something that we had Hal Galper on the podcast, and that's kind of how he approaches learning licks. You know, just take licks you like from your favorite players and just put them through the ringer, like play them in different keys, or just take the melodic shape from the lick. And I think we have a similar issue. Like, I'm a guitarist, and you know, I play piano as well, and the piano is so logically laid out that you can kind of, it's so easy to see where the chord tones are laid out and how the voice leading would follow, but not necessarily so. And I see a lot of people that don't play licks, their ideas don't kind of resolve melodically or voice lead into the chords in a way that makes sense. And that's something that even if you're not going to play the actual lick, from playing good licks, you learn how those resolutions happen, and you can take those little ideas. And so for me, licks definitely aren't necessarily just inserting them into the solo, but once they're so natural, you start to embellish them and leave things out and add ideas to them. And I find it, from my experience from teaching, especially high school jazz guitar players, starting with licks makes them better players in a shorter amount of time for almost all of them. And even if they are natural, like, it seems like having some vocabulary in there is like invaluable. And it can just be things that you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, pages of forced licks or anything like that, just little ideas.
Yeah. I think of it also like my one trumpet teacher said, he goes, "You're like a stew. You like we're talking trumpet. You like the way this guy attacks. You like this guy's sound. You like this guy's range. You like the way this guy plays a ballad. You like this. You put it in your stew and you stir it up. So if you're at some point, it's good to learn a whole solo because it's a challenge. It's like an etude. But at some point, you just pick your favorite stuff, and you bring it into your camp, and then you can embellish it and go, I kind of like doing it this way. I mean, I think people are afraid. I don't know what happens. Sometimes you hear people that maybe lack imagination in their improvisation, so they take licks and then they just kind of regurgitate that. But that's not the fault of the lick. That's the fault of the person getting the lick and not being creative, or just trusting that they can make up something because of that, or they can embellish that in a way that's creative.
I completely agree. And I've even found too that if I first teach licks to a student, like, a lick that goes over the 5 chord or whatever, if you try to teach them the theory about it later on, once they can already hear the lick and know it, the theory kind of just falls into place and it makes sense. But if you try to get too theoretical at first when they don't have any real musical ideas that are linked to that theory, the theory is almost just not useful at all for them, especially with jazz, because it can get so theory heavy fast if you're, depending on what tunes you're playing over.
Right.
And often it's just better to, do the theory once they have a bit of vocabulary under their fingers and probably even better able to sing it.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of doing that, being able to sing
absolutely
the licks that you play.
Yeah, because sometimes
that's what I'm doing right now with your giant step stuff. I'm learning to sing those exercises.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So and maybe we'll get into how you would practice, playing over brand new tunes and new changes as well. Because what I did is I took your etudes and I recorded like 1 bar increments of them, and I sing the 1 bar multiple times,
right?
And I've gone through the whole etude like that, and then now I'm doing 2 bars at a time, and then kind of once I'm at 2 bars at a time, it feels like I can just start singing over the whole thing,
right?
But for me, it's helpful to break it down into
because there's also symmetrical ones, so you kind of, once you get it. With maybe not all of them, but maybe some of them, once you get a couple bars, you can hear it, then you can kind of force it through the rest of the etude, hopefully.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that first one was really cool. There's a lot of like minor 7th arpeggios that are not necessarily in the same part of the key. They're, sometimes it's over the 2 chord, sometimes it's over the 1 chord, like implying a sharp 11 or something like that, from what I remember. But it's kind of cool. It changes the way you hear it.
Right.
But how would you approach playing over a new set of changes that you can't hear already? You have no licks to, like say for example, giant steps. Like you're trying to teach someone giant steps who can't hear those changes yet. what would you have them start doing, or what would you do yourself?
I try to find commonality and things that I can relate to past experience, like when it goes to the B flat 7 to the E flat major. From experience, I know that's 5-1, so I can that I got that covered. I mean, and I know Giant says, but let's say I didn't. So the first chord is a B major. I would, different ways. It's one, I'd outline the chords in whatever way I want to outline them. I don't have to outline them in a boring way. But maybe I always kind of like starting on the third of a major chord, or starting on the major 7 and outlining that way up. Like major 7, root, 3rd, 5th, or from the 3rd, 3rd, 5th, major 7, 9, right? And maybe when I did that, I'd see on Giant Steps, I could do the 3rd, 5th, like I have my Evie. So I could go, I'm going to get it all tangled. I'm trying to be quiet so I don't mess up my recording. So all of a sudden I'm at the root of the next chord, right? So maybe I'd work out slowly, like, or whatever. Like I go through each chord maybe at a time first so I can get connected with what's going on. And find the relationships that make sense to me. Sometimes a chord is different than I'm used to seeing, and then I'll translate it. I'll go, oh, I can look at it like this. I can look at it like a D minor 7 or something, whatever. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Over top of a different root or something, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm curious how micro will you get with this in your practice? So like with Giant Steps, if you're going from the B major 7 into a D7 chord as like your first change, and say that's new for you, how much time will you spend just connecting the one chord to another before you start adding more? I guess it's different depending on how familiar you are with it. You're not going to need to spend as much time going from the D7 to the G major 7.
I guess it depends on how much I'm struggling with the connection. Like Giant Steps to me now is like, compared to some of the tunes that people write that I have to deal with, it's like, it's not even hard anymore. Because other people write tunes and I'm like, if I'm playing with them, I'm like, how are you thinking of that? Or I'll have to kind of translate it. So yeah, let's say if I play through a tune, I'll play through it slowly, and then let's say I have to do rehearsal and I have no time. And then after the rehearsal, I can go home. I'll find the spots that I struggled with to give continuity, and then I'll focus on those points and try to just pick a section and go, okay, let me just get this stuff straight as best I can, and I'll do it until I can feel comfortable, as if I can. There's one tune I played with this band called the Chronicles. They're like young guys. They're all really good, and the alto player wrote this tune with the solo section. It was in a different time, and the chords kind of went by fast, and I practiced it, but I was like, this part's, and I heard him play it, and he sounded good. I said, you take the solo on this part, they were splitting the solo up, and so I took the easier part of the tune, because it's like, he wrote the tune, he knows it, I can sound okay on it, but I'd rather have more time to practice it, to sit down and dissect. So in that case, I took the recording of the rehearsal and started playing to it, and then slowed things down so I could think about things, and then also try to get an overview that was not so micromanaging, more like macro. Get the macro, hear the macro along with thinking of the micro, if that makes sense.
Yeah, feeling the phrase as opposed to playing over changes.
Yeah, and hearing the key, there's sometimes you'll have a bunch of changes, but you can kind of think key center.
Yeah.
Eric and I were talking about this before with these Giant Steps licks and excuse me, with these Giant Steps licks and little etudes that you've written. But I noticed since I've been working with some of those, the changes sound different. Like, as soon as it used to sound, I don't know what it sounded like to me before, but it actually sounds like 3 distinct key centers now. Yeah. When I play it, and it and you start in B major, and you're right off the bat, you're already heading towards G.
Exactly.
If you're playing it in that key. And as soon as I get to that D7 chord, now it sounds like I'm in G now, but it didn't sound like that before. I don't know what it sounded like. It just sounded like, a soup of chord changes. But Eric and I were curious. Is that how you hear giant steps?
That's exactly it. What you just said to me, it's like key centers: B major, G major, E flat major. So the 5 chord is just going there. I'm already in that key. I can play on the 5 chord, but I'm already in G major. Yeah. So then I'm already in E flat major, and then the 2-5, I'm already in G major again. I might play the 2-5, like a bebop way, or whatever, but I'm thinking G major.
Yeah, I find it interesting because what I was doing as well on top of your licks, I was just playing. I kept all the 1 chords where they were supposed to be, and I just played through the whole tune like that. So I erased everything except the 1 chords, and I would just stay in B for the full bar instead of only half a bar, and I found that was useful too, just for feeling where the key center are changing.
Well, yeah, one of the early exercises I did on giant steps was. And so it kind of comes with teaching too. Sometimes I'm teaching and I'll usually just teach what I'm working on. So at one point I was like, how can I make giant steps simple? And I was into pentatonics, right? So I'm like, major pentatonic. I know people think differently with pentatonics. I just always think major. But you can think minor too, which makes sense too, because what I'm going to say is like, major pentatonic from the 5th of the major chord or from the root of the dominant 7. So you can play giant steps with just 3 pentatonics. So on the B major, you play F sharp major pentatonic. Then you go to D major pentatonic. On the D7, stay on D major pentatonic. Go to B flat major pentatonic, stay there for the E flat. On the 2-5, just do D major pentatonic all the way to G. Do B flat major all the way to E flat. Do F sharp all the way to B. And so that was an exercise I used to do. I even wrote a head on it. On one of my records is literally that pentatonic exercise, just playing pentatonics like every other note, like kind of going, or something to that effect. But it's like doing every other note in a pentatonic. So if I think F sharp pentatonic,
very cool.
So it was like that I made myself do giant steps like that until I was like ready to kill someone, and then when I stopped, it felt great. That was like a release, because then I had the pentatonics kind of, but then I could just play normal stuff too.
Yeah. Where does we would use the word audiation, just being able to pre-hear something in your head before you play it. And you were kind of alluding to the same idea, but where does singing come in to play? Because I noticed the stuff that's really in my fingers for me, I can walk down the street and sing it and visualize how to play it on my instrument as well. And that's often a good litmus test for how well I know something. Can I sing when I'm away from the instrument? And I'm curious where that falls in with you. Does that kind of automatically arise, or do you use the singing as a vehicle to try to expedite that as well?
Absolutely. So when I was in school with Eric, I remember living with my sister at the time, and I'd take a shower before school, and I'd be like singing, and I was thinking, God, if I could play what I'm singing, I'll be great. It'd be great. So. And I grew up like in my family, even though we all stopped singing for some reason, when we were kids, we all sang because my mother sang. So it was always trying to get that connection with singing. And I remember seeing Dizzy Gillespie on The Muppet Show. And he was scatting. And I noticed when he was scatting, he was moving his trumpet fingers to the scat. And I thought that was so cool. Like, wow, he's connected to his instrument. And now, which you might experience too, is like, when I sing, if I'm having a problem hearing it, if I put down my fingers, like for the instrument, I hear it better because it's so programmed in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, singing, even with students, if they're like, sometimes I'll show them something, they can't play it, and I'll say, sing it. And sometimes they can't sing it, so they're not hearing it. So we have to go back step one. But sometimes they're hearing it, but they're getting in the way of themselves in their head thinking. And once they sing it, it kind of breaks the dam. And then when they go back to their instrument, they can figure it out.
Singing eliminates kind of the theory, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think I learned how to do this in high school of necessity because I'd be bored in, English class or whatever. And I would use my left arm like it was a fretboard, and I would just kind of hum everything I was playing. And, you do that for 5 years and it kind of gets built into your head. And I try to do that when I'm teaching now, after I get my students to sing everything we play within reason. And sometimes I'll ask them, cover your hand on your fretboard so the strings don't make sound. I want you to finger it while you sing it. And it seems like doing that with kids, after a year or two, everything starts to get, linked up in the mind very strongly, where when they sing it, they can see how to finger it. And, when they finger it, they kind of know what it's going to sound like. And, I guess this is the nice thing about the trumpet is you're going to use similar fingerings for similar notes. Because on the guitar, you could use different fingerings for the same note. And so like, I know for me, like I can feel the fingering, I can see the fretboard in my mind, and I can hear what it's going to sound like. They're all kind of linked with each other. And I think you have to learn, you kind of have to learn all of those together and separately kind of.
I call it musical kind of a synesthesia, right?
Yeah.
Where you get the music and the tactile audiation, you've got the internal stuff, and you got the, what your body needs to do to produce all that.
Yeah.
And this, you feel, I use to sing in tune, I use my fingers all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an old trumpet when I was going to Temple too that I cut apart and just had the valves. This was before I had the Evie, because I'd be tired.
I remember that thing.
What's that?
I remember that thing.
I gave it away to a girlfriend, and she moved away and took it. She took it with her, so I had. But she found it useful. That's cool. Yeah, no, before the Evie, that's what I would do because I'd be tired. My lips would be tired, and I had energy to play music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share with us, share with the listeners a little bit. What is this thing that we keep talking about? And you've played it for us on the podcast already. Tell us more about this instrument.
It's kind of plugged in weird here. It's like kind of a electric. This is the one I use at home because it's unpredictable. It'll turn off or change patches for some reason. But it's kind of made for a trumpet player. So it has like octaves here. The rollers are here with my thumb. And it has certain notes on the trumpet are the same fingering, like E's and A's, F's and B flats.
So you get a half an octave with that finger, and then you got to use your finger to get the next half.
Yeah.
And then you turn the bottom to go up an octave, and you do the same thing over again.
Yeah, and it's the same
finger on or finger off.
It's low fingerings of trumpet. So
and you started using this as a way to give your chops a break, essentially.
Once I heard about it, I was like, well, I was always jealous of sax players too, because I was like, they could always play all this stuff, and I was like, once I heard that I heard about the instrument, I was like, I'm getting that instrument. I'm sure I was the first guy in Philly to get it. I had to be, or at least the first couple guys to get it.
Yeah.
So for me, and then it opened up my world in different ways that I didn't predict, like listening to electronic music, getting, checking out guitar players more, because, for me, my amp choices are influenced by guitar players, or my pedal choices are always guitar players. I used to ask them questions like, "What does this do?"
Yeah.
Interesting. So what are you running that? What are you running that through in terms of an amp then?
Right now, I just have
playing.
The amp I have there is I'm going through a Dave Smith Evolver. It's called. It's like a monophonic synth, and I'm going through actually a homemade amp that my guy I share a house with. There was a period where he was building amps, so. I didn't have it set up, and then right before we got on, I was like, well, maybe I should just have it to grab to play. And usually I use wireless, but I didn't have the time to set it up, so I kind of plugged myself in. So I have that amp, but the amp I play on gigs is a Quilter. You know the Quilter amps?
I'm not super familiar with them.
They're like, they're kind of, seems like the guitar players in Philly, like some of the guys use the Quilter. It's like a solid state.
Yep.
And You can get real loud, but it's got a good sound.
Yeah, solid state amps are generally nice. They'll keep a similar tone quality no matter the volume. If a tube amp, you kind of need to drive it pretty hard to get the sweet sound out of it, and that can be really inappropriate for small gigs.
And also just to carry
or
it can
home
be
play.
it's heavy. So I mean, this I can park. I could be 4 blocks away and carry it and hang on a loud gig and play. So and I can. But also, I'm using my iPad for the podcast. But I mean, I play through my iPad. It's my lazy way to practice. I just have a cup of coffee, turn on the iPad, and just will, work on something, work on tunes I have to work on for an upcoming gig.
Mm-hmm.
So
you mentioned it was changing what you were listening to, and I'm imagining it even changed the way you listen to yourself, just because, if you grow up only playing trumpet, it has a certain timbre to it, and you start playing this different instrument.
Yeah.
I know it's nice being a guitar player because you have, you can play classical guitar, you can play an acoustic guitar. Once you're an electric guitar, the sounds never end. There's an insane amount of stuff to choose from.
Yeah, guitar is like in my next life, it's going to be guitar, or maybe not music at all.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
Hey, John, you mentioned your mom, and being an early childhood guy, I'm curious what your experiences or what was she doing when you were in her belly, and then the first few years of life, she sang, and your siblings sang, you said. Can you just give me a quick, what was your experience was there jazz in the household? What was going on?
So she sang. She took a break. She met my dad in New York. My dad was going to Columbia. She had gone to study with the teacher at Juilliard. She was going to go to Juilliard, and then he left, and so she studied with him in New York, and she was freelancing around New York City because she had already got her undergrad. So when he got a job with GE, she stopped music for a while, but she always had the piano at home, was singing, teaching lessons. And there was always music in the house. So my father would like Beethoven and more conservative stuff. And they like, what do we have for records? Because my father had just passed away, so we were playing some of the records. We had Al Hirt records. Roberta Flack. He liked Roberta Flack, the first take with Ron Carter, and then I remember them putting us to sleep with Aaron Copland, Rodeo, and Billy the Kid. I think one Leonard Bernstein version from. So we were always growing up with music. Then my mom was a choir director, so we were always singing. We have tapes of us singing when we were real young, whatever. And then when I first learned trumpet, my mom, because I guess she got an education degree, she picked up the trumpet. She goes and showed me how to play it, because she played clarinet and trumpet. And my grandfather, who was already passed away, played all the instruments. So it was in the blood. So music was always playing,
Yeah, cool. I find that every musician that's of some decent level has some early childhood story that, you just can't. There's never anybody I talk to that says, we didn't have anything going on.
Yeah, so that. Cool. But I know when my sister took lessons, I saw how much she hated it on piano. I never wanted to play piano. Like now, I regret it. But when I saw how much she hated it, I was like, I don't even want to get near that instrument,
But you can still lay out, you still play changes.
Oh yeah, I accompany students and stuff. But I mean, that was after years of slouching and not wanting to, just hating the piano. Just for some reason, it just left a bad thing in my head. No, I can still play. Yeah, mediocre.
Yeah, I've definitely made a living off of rescuing piano students. About half my students are piano students, and I'm mainly a guitar player. But it's just usually because they don't like the piano instruction, and I just teach them songs they want to learn for the first few years. I don't really go too hardcore with the classical method or anything, and they you can teach them most of what they need to know just like that, and then they usually stick with it too.
That seems like a better way to do it. I'm teaching a beginner trumpet student who's in the theater department at the college, so she's learning, she wants to play trumpet. I'm just showing her songs say, what songs do
Yeah.
you know? So we went, we did
Yeah.
Pink Panther, we did Take Me Out to the Ball Game, we did Girl from Ipanema, you know.
I mean, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but two reasons I really like to do this is one, if you teach them songs they like, they probably have listened to them a lot, so they're already in their ear. So just pulling it off on the instrument is often just easier to do, because if you have to get the song in their ear, you're gonna have to you play it with them, but you need them to listen to the song a lot,
Right.
essentially. And sometimes they just won't do that if it's a song they're not connecting to. And then the other reason I'm more open to just starting the first few years of lessons like this is a lot of kids are just playing piano as a hobby for fun, right? They're not trying to be a professional musician when they're like 8 or 9, and pushing them into a super fast tracked curriculum. It's not necessarily what they're even signing up for. They just want to play some tunes and have some fun. And especially at like a once a week lesson for an 8-year-old or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but often what happens is they do so well with that, after a while they'll stop requesting songs, and I'll be like, well, you should check this song out. This is kind of cool. It's kind of like this other one that we learned, but it's got a little something else. And then, they start getting into jazz or whatever from that. And it's kind of my experience with piano. I just, everything I learned on the guitar, we had a piano in the house and I knew the names of the notes, and I just figured out how to play it on the piano. And you do that for long enough at a young enough age, and you get pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Kind of fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I call it microwave piano. I used to play piano while my pizza pockets were in the microwave. So 2 minutes here and there every day, it starts adding up, and you get better at it. And I think I got some kind of sick satisfaction of being able to play the piano without having had lessons. My brother had lessons, but I could kind of play some things even though I wasn't taking piano lessons, and I thought that was really fun.
Yeah,
that was cool.
That is cool.
But I love the idea of parents just having pianos in the house, whether or not you're going to have lessons on them, because you never know. Like for me, my brother moved out. He's older than me, but literally us just having a piano in the house made me into a decent piano player, because I was kind of experimenting with it. And I've heard parents threaten to get rid of a piano, like, oh, if you're not going to play it, we're getting rid of it. But to me, that just sounds like you should have instruments in the house for kids to play around with, and God knows why. Some kids like trumpets more than pianos, or drums more than guitars. But yeah, I like the idea of just having it there for kids.
You got to imagine probably the turn of the century, like 19th century to 20th century, pianos were in everybody's house, because you had all that kind of like song music from back in that era. Everybody could kind of read, or not everybody, but a lot more people seem to be able to read music and just play at home for entertainment, because there wasn't all this other stuff we have now.
And singing too, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously grew up in a family where singing was big. It wasn't in my family, but my mom put me in a lot of programs when I was younger, and we sang a lot at school. Actually, I don't know why. It was just lucky, I guess. But we were always singing, and I think I meet a lot of kids nowadays that until they meet me, they haven't sung very much.
Right.
Which seems like I know for Eric this is huge, and it's huge for me. But yeah, not learning how to sing even to a basic degree. It can be crippling for a musician.
But also, I always think if you're playing a wind instrument, your whole goal is to try to sound like you're singing through the instrument.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll do this with students where we'll improvise, and I'll say, you can't play something unless you can sing it at the same time. It's easy on guitar because you can literally sing while you're playing, but often when people are very scale heavy in their mind, and they don't have licks that they know, the lines that they play, they don't sound lyrical. It doesn't sound like something someone would actually sing.
And they don't
not
breathe.
That everything has to say. Yeah, and they don't breathe. Like I even noticed this when I play guitar licks, my breathing is, even if I'm not singing, it lines up with where I should be breathing when I'm singing anyway, because it's all kind of connected to the same process.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny how that works.
I always appreciate the vocalists that sound like instrumentalists too, the other way around.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember going to Temple, and one of the singers asked me for lessons to study with me. I just said, just listen to records and copy, just sing to the records. I mean, that's basically what we're all trying to do, is like copy the masters by learning the solos or imitating them. There's no, I don't know what I could show you. Just all you have to do is find the records you like and learn to sing along with them. I mean, that's even, I remember playing at Chris's one night with guys from New York, and we were at the bar, and around midnight came on, Miles Davis record,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all kind of singing along to the solos at different points. It's like we all know this record. That's why we're on this gig, because we spent we had a commonality in that we all digested this.
It's one of the most beautiful records he came up with, I thought. It was round about midnight.
Yeah.
And the tune Round Midnight.
Right.
Yeah. And that's been the jazz, tradition, is people taking records and learning to sing them and learning to play along with them. And then, there's a lot of imitation at first, and then it starts turning into, like you said, I think what did you use the analogy of a soup? You become like a soup of your influences.
Right.
And I like the way, that you put that, because I think that's how you start developing your own style. It's not like you're necessarily trying to purposely do something that's like never been done before. It's just you have all these influences and they start crashing together, and when you use them all at the same time, you're going to sound like no one else sounds, just because you're using all these different ideas.
And you
it's not necessary.
And you gravitate toward these ideas more than maybe somebody else is going to gravitate toward those, so you get your own take on things. Mm-hmm. I also think improvisation as like having a conversation like now, where we know the words we've said many times, phrases, but we're saying them in the moment of reacting to each other in a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny too, the different areas you can, grab licks from too. Like there's this Bach lick that I took from one of his inventions, where he's in D minor, he's playing over like an A7 chord, and it goes C sharp up to B flat. And he does this a ton. And I love that sound.
Right.
It goes C sharp to B flat and then down the scale from there. And I started noticing like Bach always does that leap over 5 chords and stuff. It's all over the place, but it works so well over jazz tunes too, because it's really similar harmonic vocabulary.
I always feel like bebop.
It's funny.
Bebop's almost related to Baroque in a way. The voice leadings.
It really is, and I it's one of my favorite things to talk about, and I think this is why I meet a lot of younger jazz students who haven't studied bebop, and they can't phrase whether rhythmically or harmonically, but bebop's so amazing once you learn to hear it and play it, just because you almost get blown away. Like the chord changes are outlined like with this sculpted like precision, and the rhythm just flows perfectly over everything. And it's almost easy to like listen to Charlie Parker and be like, oh yeah, this stuff kind of sounds obvious. But when you look at what he's doing, like everything was just so correctly placed, and it sounds natural. And it sounds good. And I feel like, for me, that's such an important thing for jazz musicians to learn how to do, because there's nothing wrong with playing in a more like floaty way over changes, whether it's, being more vague about the chords you're implying. But if you don't have that ability to outline changes in a way that doesn't just sound like you're running up and down, arpeggios,
right.
You're missing something. And then voice leading, you said that a bunch of times on this podcast, but that's such an important skill to
even
have.
When you talk about that, I was thinking about Wayne Shorter passing away, and thinking about the Miles Davis group in the 60s. There was the way they were writing tunes, because they were influenced by Ornette Coleman, who had kind of like broken apart. They'd be playing the form of a tune, but they would kind of just play over the form and not necessarily play the changes, or try to play melody. And I know Miles had that period. His group, it's like there's a record live with the Plug Nickel, where it sounds like when they're playing tunes, they're following the form, but they're just letting their ears go and just kind of following their ears and playing more of that floaty sometimes. But they have the foundation from before, so
exactly.
So it sounds great, because they're just kind of following their. You can just tell, you can hear their, Herbie's ear when he's soloing, or Wayne, just kind of doing these kind of
Max
vague
Roach,
shapes.
Too, right?
What's that?
Max Roach was on that one.
No, that was Tony Williams, Ron Carter, and Herbie.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was
the Plug Nickel one. Okay.
Yeah, and that was like Wayne, to me, as an improviser, was like a painter. He just kind of paints. I can't describe it. He'll just go, oh, here I am. Here's my stroke. Like a different way of playing. And you just hear it develop through his lifetime, like the Plug Nickel playing a certain way. Or you hear him on this, Asia solo. That's Wayne on Steely Dan.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's just playing like, I think I'm off center a little bit, but I like that vague playing too. I like that
Oh, for sure.
not trying to nail everything, but I like the idea of being able to nail it so you can not nail it.
Especially when when you're chasing the bebop dragon, until you can do it, it's quite mysterious how people do it. And then once you get it under your fingers, like anything, it starts getting stale if you don't have variety. And then going into that other kind of playing that's more abstract or more about like a melodic shape or about the form of a tune. Like Eric and I talk a lot about like playing blues forms with like totally different changes, putting odd changes, but keeping the form. And that kind of playing can be so refreshing after you've, really tried to build some bebop vocabulary, just because it sounds totally different. And it's I think that's why a lot of people, they go through that phase of like, playing over standard bebop tunes and getting that, and then it gets into the pentatonic stuff, and then it gets in, because it opens your ears up to different sounds.
Yeah, and what you said, like, and the other important thing in jazz, when we're talking jazz or music in general, time. So I remember doing a master class with an alto player, and he played a blues, and he said, "Now I want to demonstrate how I'm not going to care about the chords, but I'm going to play with good time and good feel, and it's still going to sound good." So he just played irrelevant to the chord, but because his time and phrasing was still cool, it sounded great. So I always think time's another important factor, along with the right note choices. You got to have a good feel, whatever genre you want to play in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I like that. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to change a little bit and ask you to talk about the way you do composition, because I know you compose, and how that differs, or what's that process for you?
Well, lately I'm trying to do more electronic stuff, so I have hardware, so I kind of go with the whim of what the hardware does, but I got to get back into DAW stuff because I want to get back into a more complicated composition and process. I have a lot of like sequences and loops that I've made in recent times, so that's more just like, oh, find a sound, let me hear what I'm hearing, what kind of drum, what kind of texture, can I add something else to this, can it move to another section, but the hardware is kind of limiting, so I want to get back into getting to the using a DAW and building composition. But when I was doing more jazz tunes, I'm actually staying away from doing song form because I'm not as interested in it at the moment. But when I was doing jazz tunes, basically they were in a song form, not always 32 bar, but kind of in that traditional way of doing it. And so the way I worked when I was on the Crisscross label was really quickly. He invited me to a session, so I heard a session. It was like, and the musicians sounded great, but at the very end of the session, they played a blues, and I just heard how everybody was relaxed, and just how they just played, everything just felt like it just freed to another level. So in my head, I was like, okay, simple, write simply, because we only have, it's not like I was doing records with groups I played with. I did a couple like that, but generally one rehearsal, record date. So I would write simple tunes that we can rehearse and then get to the music right away. And usually my last several records, I just had a tape recorder in the car or wherever with me, and anytime I heard a melody, I just would sing into the tape recorder and then figure out chord changes to the melody, maybe develop it later on. But I'd get inspiration in my head and then sing, save it, and then at home I'd go through and figure out what was going on and try to make a tune out of it.
Yeah, got it.
So singing, once again, that's what I did for those.
Yep.
Not every tune, but I'd say the majority of them.
Yep.
Started with singing.
Yeah. Eric and I have been talking a lot about this recently together, but this, the idea of when you're learning something or producing something, like doing things that are kind of within your control and in your bones, like obviously there's nothing wrong with trying to compose tunes that stretch your own like harmonic vocabulary or whatever. But like, I do think a lot of the times musicians, and especially teachers, forget that like the point of a lot of this is to have fun and make some music. And sometimes playing tunes that like are within your control already, and doing a session or two and then just getting it down, whether it's on a recording software or a piece of staff paper, that's totally fine to do. Not everything has to be trying to stretch and push and requiring like a year of practice before you can even play over the changes of your own tune. Like sometimes it's fine just to like, let's compose more tunes and like do simple ideas and see where this takes us.
Right.
Yeah. And I see a lot of teachers do that. They're almost like every song has to be more difficult than the last one, instead of like, once in a while it's like, let's just have a tune we can actually play.
Yeah. And even that's it's difficult to make anything sound good in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, to really musically play something, it's so why make it? Yeah. So I guess I like complicated stuff too, obviously, but a lot of times I'll hear music and it sounds, sometimes will be complicated, but it sounds musical inside all the complication. Still, it has the simplicity to connect, but sometimes it sounds like I'll listen to some things. I'll be like, well, why? I would never want to listen to this again because it doesn't seem like it has maybe I'm not getting it. I'll try to listen to it again. But sometimes I feel like it's complicated for complication. To be complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
It's
it's
lacking in elements that are to connect to, like a through. Because there's super complicated, deep music that connects right away, and then there's music that's complicated that's just like missing the point.
For me, like a composer that really like walks the walk with that is Stravinsky. When I listen to Stravinsky, I get like, obviously you're like, holy shit, this is complicated. But I usually with his pieces feel like some pull, or like I feel like when I listen to him, like I'm picturing images or something. But when I listen to a lot of other, composers around the same time or even in the last 100 years, sometimes I just feel like there's nothing that I'm not connecting with something melodically or rhythmically, or a picture isn't being painted in my mind. And I kind of feel like it's more like an exercise, like the composer's doing some kind of mental exercise rather than making music that I can actually get into. I went to the symphony a year ago, and there was a debut of this performer, and it wasn't a bad symphony by any means, but it's not something I would, put on again. Like I wouldn't put put that recording on and listening to it just because there was nothing to connect to. And I think you were bringing up the point that sometimes you just don't get it, and you need someone to point out to you like why it's interesting or what to look for. But I do feel like a lot of the time it can just be sometimes solos too. You hear this on jazz solos. It's like a great tune, a great head, and then the solo just makes no sense. It's just like rambling all of a sudden, and it doesn't fit in the context of the song. Even though it might be a good player, like technically or whatever, it just doesn't fit with the overall. There's no prosody. There's no like unity in how the solo is not bringing the song somewhere interesting. You're almost dying to get back to the head to have something to grab onto.
Right. Well, I think a couple things on that. Well, Stravinsky always had a character. You hear the character in his music. It's like he's the. I'm not saying they're the same, but Picasso had a character. Like you see his stuff. That's Picasso. You see Stravinsky. You hear that. It's like you just. But even I remember even like pre, 12-tone Schoenberg. I forget what it was, Verlick Nacht or something. What is it? I don't know what it's called, but that was pretty complicated. But that was, I enjoyed listening to it because he was stretching, going for that thing. But I think he was still using his ears, and I think he always uses his ears probably. But
yeah,
sure.
His early stuff, and then after a while, I just had to bag out.
I mean, I haven't checked out his later stuff. I'm not a connoisseur, but what was I going to say? I always think of music like when I'm trying to play music, I try to picture. When you're young and you hear music, and it's like this amazing thing you're hearing. Like when I was a kid listening to Stevie Wonder records, like amazed by like what and not thinking about it. It's like I know I'll go, sometimes I'll hear a concert with certain musicians and they'll be like, oh, D7, sharp 9. It's like, I'm not even trying to think like that. I'm trying to listen to music like I listened as a kid. And so I think of playing music as trying to get back to that simple thing. you work up all the skills in your practice. Yeah, I think I'm always thinking of crazy things to practice, but the goal is stop thinking and then play from that point, that wonder, that mystery that's there, that you can't put your finger on. Why did I play that? It doesn't even make sense with the chord, but it sounds good. You know, does that make sense? I don't know if that.
No, that totally makes sense. I've mentioned this to Eric before, but I obsessively watched this Joe Pass video when I was younger. Like the whole thing was like an hour that it's been like burned into my mind of him explaining how he's playing over changes. And sometimes it's so simple. He's like, well, why did I do that? And he's like, well, on the chord before I went da 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 da. So I just figured I could go da 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 on this next chord. But that next chord happened to be, some ridiculous augmented thing or whatever. But a lot of it was just like the melodic shape or the rhythm. It wasn't, and then he kind of contorted the notes so it fit over the chord change. But and Dizzy has that great quote, like, stop thinking of what like notes to play over chords, just like choose a rhythm, like sing a rhythm and just put notes over that rhythm.
That's funny you said that. You said that because I have a story. My trumpet teacher, Eric, you remember Mike Natali?
Yeah, I took lessons with him too.
Yeah, Mike's still around, but he told me this story. He was going to his girlfriend's high school graduation, and Dizzy was in the audience because he must have had a relative graduating or something. So he went and sat next to Dizzy. He's like, hi, Mr. Gillespie. He sits next to him, and then halfway through, Dizzy goes, where can you get a milkshake around here? So he goes, I know where. So Mike takes Dizzy to get a milkshake. And, Mike said he's like 17 years old or 18 years old, and he doesn't know what to ask Dizzy Gillespie. He goes, but when you improvise, what are you thinking about? And he goes, well, stupid question. I'm just a kid. And Dizzy goes, I think of the rhythm and I fill in the notes. Exactly kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it might. I heard that story from Hal Galper, but it might have been the same story.
Okay, you heard that same story?
Yeah.
That one?
Exactly.
I heard that story from Hal Galper.
But not necessarily Dizzy, was it? It was
else. It was Dizzy.
It was Dizzy.
Okay. Dizzy said that to Hal?
I think so. Hal heard that story from somebody. I don't know if Hal heard if Hal was talking to Dizzy, but I mean we could check. It's online somewhere. But that's often my first piece of advice when I get a high school jazz guitar student who's not really the solos aren't melodic, and it's not because they're so advanced they're trying to break new ground. It's just they just can't make solos that sound natural like they're speaking. And I often will just say, like, you have to think of the rhythm like first. Like, let's just take 3 notes of the the major scale and just play some melodies that like restrict the notes, but just you have no restriction on the rhythm,
right.
and scat the rhythm before you play it, or do something like that. And yeah, I mean, it's so easy with jazz specifically because there's a lot of harmonic information you have to get a handle on, and you can kind of your brain can kind of start getting too focused on that and forget about coming up with interesting rhythms at the same time.
Right.
And that's often what I see happen to students as they go through some kind of cycle like that. It's like they start getting a handle on the harmonic stuff, and then the rhythm goes out the window for a while. And that's why I'm such a big fan of learning licks, is the licks have rhythms built into them that you can grab hold of, and they push you through the the changes or the form of the song.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a good there's one YouTube channel, it'll come up on my feed. I forget what it's called, but you can find it if you look up. There's one of their posts is, why do I still suck? And and basically what they do in the thing is they have he says they bring up, because you're not playing rhythm in your solo, and they have an exercise where they're doing rhythming, that monk tune, and then you kind of go through it, and then they say, now try to do your solo, but play some of these rhythms, play pieces of the rhythm from this melody.
Yep.
So rhythm is super important, and certain things go out the window at different times. Like even if I'm teaching even really good players, and from my experience of, I don't even know they're good yet because I'll be showing them a concept and they can't really play it, and then we get to playing some music and they start playing. I'm like, oh, he sounds great. I'm like judging him based on the fact that I just gave him something he never played before. Like, I have to remind myself, he plays musical, everything's musical, everything's coming out great. I just gave him something that put a hitch in his whole thing. It's not that he's not, I make a judgment that's not correct because.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I remember being in a guitar lesson with a jazz, this great guitarist in Vancouver here, and he was showing me how to play these they're like these pentatonics that can imply Dorian. They're these interesting pentatonics with like a flat 5 that you can put over in a certain part of the chord to imply Dorian. And he was showing me these kind of scalier things, and it didn't sing yet to me, but it took me a couple weeks to start making my own licks, and then you can pre-hear the licks that you're playing, and once you can pre-hear them a little bit, you can embellish them and contort them and stuff like that. Right. But yeah, the rhythm I think is often, I mean, we often talk about like transcribing solos or learning solos, but I think even for people that are trying to get the bebop phrasing down, not even learning the notes of like a Parker head, just learning to scat a bunch of bebop tunes is so useful, because often people just don't have the phrasing down at a basic level.
Yeah, and that's another thing with teaching, I think. I'll teach at Westchester, and sometimes I'll get a student that wants to learn jazz, and it's like no listening. They've never done any listening, and it's like, I mean, you can't teach classical or jazz or any music. You got to be listening to start to get some of that stuff in your head. So immediately I'm just saying, okay, listen to this stuff. I mean, If you don't like it, then find the music you like. I mean, that's the most important thing. Find what you like so you can get into it. But because I know when I was younger playing, I would be sitting in, and I remember playing something, and I was like, wait, I never even practiced it, but it was like a Coltrane lick. It wasn't a complicated Coltrane lick, but it was a basic thing that I heard him play, and it came out because I had just been listening to the records, Yeah. So scatting to it, listening to it is just so important to get that in your brain, so you're already on the jump with what's going on.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about improv, because it's one thing. It's one thing if you're going to learn a classical tune and that your teacher plays 4 bars of it, and then you read the music and try to copy the sound right in front of you. Yeah. But when you're trying to improv, you need vocabulary, you need ideas. These they're not going to come from nowhere. And I mean, I've heard. It's just so many times you hear stories of jazz musicians like, oh, I just listened to this record, sang along with it, copied it on my instrument, and they do that for a few years. I mean, that's Charlie Christian to Wes Montgomery to George Benson. Like, that's the tradition. It's just these guys listening to each other and pushing the the envelope over and over again. And so I'm a bit biased in terms of learning licks, just because I think if you study like jazz history, I mean, that's what almost all of them have done. Once in a while, you get guys like Barry Harris, who are like, don't learn licks, learn the theory first and stuff like that. And I don't have any doubt that Barry Harris is a great player. But
he might say that,
but Barry
he's doing that
exactly.
on his, if you look at his clinic, he's singing licks for rhythm changes for the kids. He'll sing the phrase, they learn it, and he sings on. He's showing them licks. So I mean, I don't know. I never thought. Does he actually say don't learn licks? Just learn the.
Yeah, I've heard him say, and one of he is a great student. I'm forgetting the guy's name, but I think the guy's name is Sean, but I forget his last name. He was a student of Harris's for like 15 years, and he runs a website called Jazz Skills, and great content, great player. But he's much more in this mindset, like learn the theory, learn the scales, don't play licks. But then how are they playing the skills? How are they playing the scales? Da 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 da. Right. They're playing it in rhythm, and then they teach you to embellish these things. So I'm a big fan of theory and learning all of that. I mean, Eric and I, we have a different way of talking about that with the Edwin Gordon crowd, but we're talking how jazz musicians think right now. But I think theory is great to learn. But I've always found that if you pin the theory to vocabulary that you can sing and that the theory always goes much further.
Right.
When it's done that way.
And maybe you can argue that there are people who learn a little differently, so you have to shift a little bit for different people. So some maybe for some reason connect to the theory first, and so there's always like a pliable. There's no set little formula that works. It's got to bend, Yeah.
Yeah, and no one's saying like definitely like when people push boundaries. I mean, often like jazz musicians will compose tunes that like they theoretically invent first and learn to hear it later. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that's how Giant Steps was composed. He was like, okay, what if I put these 2 5s around these 3 key centers that are a major third away? I mean, that it seems like that's what he was doing, and I don't think he was hearing that before he composed the tune. He probably came up with that theoretically, and then learned to hear it along the way. So that's fine. No one's saying don't do that. But yeah, for me,
but I mean, he had already spent years playing. I mean, it wasn't like he was coming out. But even out of the blue, if you're doing that, that's cool. But at the same time, you can't live in a vacuum. So you can't be a great tennis player without watching all the great tennis players. You can't. Even Mike Tyson talked about how he watched all the great fighters before, to learn how to be a great fighter. I mean, it's like that's the way it is.
Yeah, and it lines up more with how language acquisition works. You learn vocabulary, you learn words, and then you learn how to put the words into sentences. Right. And I think it doesn't mean you're not going to be like you can be a great author using only words that you didn't invent. You don't have to invent brand new words. You have to learn how to do creative things with them, and make a story with them. And I like that analogy. It seems like if you have a student who's struggling with improv, you can actually give them something to do rather than just say mess around. You can say, well, learn these licks, and then once you can sing these, maybe try embellishing one note. And then it's something that's actually manageable and trainable rather than just like, oh yeah, go home and noodle. Because I find that once in a while you get people who are so musical. I mean, they will go home and noodle, and they'll do that for 5 hours a day, and it turns out okay. But it's kind of discouraging when you get a high school kid and you're trying to give them some way to train this, because it can seem like such a big task to do until you kind of break through a little bit.
Yeah. And I still do that in my practice. I'll have little phrase. I have another etude I'm going to put out that I wrote that I got to first learn how to play, and then I have another concept for another etude I want to do based on conceptual things that I want to do in my practice, so I can keep hopefully growing. Playing is the most important thing. It's good at this point, but because it's like you're an athlete, you got to play and get the timing. But I like tinkering. I'm like a little engineer. My dad was an engineer, so I like finding little concepts to work on. Yeah. So I'll show the students the concepts I'm working on. Like one I have now is like a basic concept, just triadic concepts. Should I talk about this or no?
Oh, 100%.
So like, let's say we're saying, for me, G7, right? Let's say a G7. One concept that sounds good over a G7, my G7 F concert, is just think of the triad and approach each triadic note from the diatonic note above and then play the triad. So in other words, if I play the fourth, I'm going to play 3 root 5 after that. And then I'm going to go to the second. I'll play it. So you hear it first. So I'm just playing 4, 3, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 3, 6, 5, 3, 1. So I'm just outlining the triad. I can go up the same way. But I can go up like this too.
I love that one.
But I'm still playing the triad. I'm just going up that time. So now I can, on a 7th chord, I learned that being in soloing, if I'm on a G7, my G7, I can talk concert too. I can play my D minor licks sound good on G7 because kind of the 5 is connected to the 2 in traditional jazz. So I can do the D minor Dorian shape over G7, which is same concept, 6 to 5, 4 to 3, 2 to 1. So I can go on D minor. And then go back up. I can go back up the way.
Yep.
And then I can put them both together on the G7. So now I'm going to do the major and the minor. Oh, no. And I can go back up. Minor. The next one's going to be major, from the same note, because the 6 of the D minor is the B. The 2 of the D minor is the 6 of the G. So E to D, and then E to D again for the G triad. And Now D minor, then second the root for the G. You know, and so on. So it's a concept.
So this is a great example of the other way of doing it, where, you know, it's theory first, or some kind of idea. But I mean, after a while, I've no doubt you just start hearing that as a lick that's now in your repertoire. Like, even though you probably constructed it at first very, you know, it has a theoretical construction. Like, there's a triad. I'm going to approach it by like a diatonic note, but eventually you just start hearing that as a lick that's in your
So I don't
brain.
I don't really have it down. I played you in the key I can play. Because it's a concept I've been thinking about, that I can play pieces of it in any key, like if I'm soloing, but I can't do the concept of the whole 7 chord using the minor and the major down, up and down. So yes, because I also like, if you listen to the early jazzers, they're doing, you know, they're going like, they're doing like triads, and it sounds so cool. And I realized at one point in my playing, I was like, God, I can't even play a triad well. I'm so used to playing bebop lines. So then I just started working on that thing, and then you know, that was years ago. But now I kind of like the idea of having really simple concepts to do. So I can do that concept. Then I'm going to shut up with this, like with tritone substitutions.
No, it's great.
You know, tritone subs.
Yeah.
You know, so if I'm doing
a
G7, and I want to go to a C major, but I want to make a little formula to practice. I mean, I do them all the time, but in this case, maybe I go like, now I'm going to go a G7 or a C sharp or B concert B7. Now I'm going to play the same concept there. So it's like, you know, that I resolved to B flat concert, B flat 7. But I'm forcing this concept so I can. It's a formula in my practice. This concept only, to, you know, in a G7, D flat 7, C7.
It's crazy how much mileage you can get out of something like that, because even, you know, you can take this concept and then you start putting it over different changes. You start using it as an extension over something else. And
right.
You can relate something you've mastered to something new, and it seems to you just get such a big cash value out of stuff. You can keep recycling stuff and making more interesting ways of using it.
Yeah, what's kind of cool, I mean, about music, as you see with you know, players like Chick Corea and Wayne and Herbie, it's like it's a never-ending like fountain of like fun, like just exploration. If you love music, it's like, wow, this is cool. You know, it's always interesting. It's always kind of inspiring.
Yeah, and that seems to work very well for composing and for improvising, like thinking in melodic shapes and having some kind of, you could have a formula for that, or even a more looser melodic shape where you're, you know, maybe you're going 3 notes. That one has to be close to each other and then the other one has to be a leap, and just run that over changes and see what happens.
Right.
It's just a lot of fun to do stuff like that.
So, John, in my early childhood programs, after Beau and I started talking, and he's much heavier jazzer than I am, although I listen to the shit a lot, and I just love it, you know. You go back to Louis, and you get up, you know, Clifford Brown. It's just like, go through the whole litany of the great trumpet players. It's like, I love them all. But anyway, it's like, what do children need? It's like, well, why can't I just play London Bridge, which is the best melody for this, is instead of, you know, My Fair Lady, you do it to, you know, tritone substitution what, right? And I just let them listen to it. It's like, so I do it in major, I do it in minor, we can do jazzy, and if you want a jazzy, I put this in. It's like, it's just giving them vocabulary, listen to it, right?
Right.
And then they can ask for it. Do you want the jazzy way, or you want
right.
Which way do you want it? And the kids like.
That's been something Eric and I have been talking about over the past few years, like taking those simple, you know, nursery rhyme songs and putting tritone subs in there. And, you know, he has young students that can tell if there's a tritone sub in these songs, which is unreal. Like, can you imagine being 4 years old and knowing like how to recognize a tritone sub in a song? Like,
yeah, right.
I know, it's ridiculous, but it's amazing that they can do it. Like, you show them the normal version long enough, and then you put the change in, and the change is just like, whoa.
Right.
It's just different. And I do 2-5-1, and then the 2, you know, plateau one, or you want to call it, but
the Neapolitan,
the
right?
thing.
The Neapolitan is the other
Yeah.
thing.
yeah, same thing. So, but they just know it because it's different than this one and this one and this one.
Right.
That's all. It's really
That's how I discovered Neapolitan chords. I remember I was having a classical lesson, and I hear it as just like a flat six, like a dominant off the flat six, and my teacher was like, no, it's a Neapolitan chord, and for me, I'm like, it just sounds like a dominant off the flat six. And he's like, that's not how we write it here. I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. But no, very, very cool. Actually, the idea you were talking about with the triads having a diatonic thing. I've been also working on your etudes over the bird blues.
Oh yeah,
and that the first one is like that. There's
some parts of
semitone. Yeah.
I went back to
semitones going into triads or outlining the changes.
Yeah, exactly. I went back to them because I was like, I should keep them up because they're kind of a challenge technically, So I remember going through it and go, oh, I'm doing that. I'm a little more developed in where I want to go with it, but in that I'm doing that triad with, like you said, approaching chromatically too.
It's also really good for your ear. Like I can play them on the guitar, but I'm spending most of my time just learning to sing it first, right. and learning to sing triads by approaching them from half steps. It really sorts your ears out. Like you can hear the changes quite well if you can do that.
Right.
And it's a lot of fun, though.
And it's so simple. I mean, I just like the simplicity of breaking things down. Obviously, there's lines, and I just like the simplicity of having a formula that's not too complicated.
One thing we haven't talked about a lot yet, but I want to be mindful of people's time as well. But, actually mastering concepts, like taking a small concept like that, like just take triads and approach them by half step or even just approach like the first note by half step and really learn how to do that, to a high level of fluency and take, for me, I'd rather have a small amount of things that I have down cold that I can play over all kinds of songs rather than just have a bunch of disconnected ideas that are not like fully in my vocabulary or fully like up to fluency. And I think there's other teachers that talk about this outside of music. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like, there's this whole thing called precision teaching, but the goal is it's not enough just to be able to do something. You have to have it master to the point where it's like, it's fluent and it just flies out of you. And that's what actually, that's what you're going for when you're learning something, is really having something down like that.
Yeah, I think,
I think you're such a great example of that.
I think my problem with teaching is I kind of start vomiting too much information to students. Like I like that concept, but like even when you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, just stick to one concept and we'll play through that the whole lesson because they're not going to have it down either way. Instead of, a lot of times I'll have somebody for one lesson, so I'll just give them a bunch of stuff they can work on the future. But it's almost better to do a single concept, like you said. It's like there was a jazz saxophone player I played with. Grant Stewart, and he was into reading Seneca, and so he was reading Seneca. And,
And
Seneca was talking.
That's what Seneca says. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, all these people have all these books, but all you need is one book, and learn that book thoroughly. And Grant was like, you learn one record. Why don't you learn like?
Yep.
Sonny Ron.
I don't know. You guys might have heard of that math prodigy. I think his name was Ramanujan, but he grew up in like India or something like that, but he was from a very poor family and he had access to like one math textbook. And he just, because he didn't have a lot of financial resources, like he learned this thing inside and out. And he ended up, contributing to, mathematics in like pretty impactful ways. And a lot of people think that it was because he took, one kind of resource and just put it through the ringer and really understood, that resource rather than, and I think I'm not religious myself. I meditate and I read a lot of Buddhist texts, but these idea of these religious systems having one book that they kind of master and they go back to, whether it's like the Bible or something, it's often better for people than just reading widely and never coming back to it. And yeah, Seneca talks about that take a few books and know them.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, and like you said, the mastery of that concept, because you can end up being a jack of all trades and not quite, But I mean,
yep.
That's why, you see somebody like Lee Konitz's career in jazz. He played the same tunes his whole life.
Yep.
Pretty much, so he would just maybe change the key, but he just mastered playing, all the things you are for 50 years or 60 years, more than that. I mean, he had a lot going on, but definitely they had their tunes that they all played together all through the years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that was a fun conversation. I'm sure it sounds like we could go on forever. This is usually what happens once you get a cup of coffee and me and talking to someone interesting, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, John, it's really good to see you, man.
Yeah, you too. Eric, where are you living?
I'm in Towson, just out of Baltimore.
Oh, nice. I thought you were down there. Okay.
Yeah, Peabody, doing early childhood music.
Oh, who's teaching? Is Sean Jones at Peabody?
Yep.
Yeah.
Or he was. Who's there now? Sean Jones? Yeah.
Did Sean leave?
They just no. I think he just came in just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Somebody else was there and left.
I think Inger Jensen was there maybe for a second.
No.
Oh, Gary Thomas was head of the jazz department at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, Benny Golson came in a couple years ago. That was fun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I saw Lee Konitz up in the Poconos at one point. This is the 80s. And there's like nobody there. It was like 6 people.
Wow.
It was so awesome.
But I remember Kenny Wheeler coming to Chris's Jazz Cafe in Philly, and I didn't hear about it. And a friend of mine went, and he said there was nobody there.
Yeah.
I said, Kenny Wheeler, come on, man. I love Kenny Wheeler.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, his stuff with Jan Garbrick and his guitar player I just turned you on to, Ralph Towner.
Oh, yeah.
That stuff, the ECM label.
And even the last record, supposedly, that Keith Jarrett did as a sideman is Kenny Wheeler's record, New High.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah. Too much.
Including yours.
Yeah.
So you played with some heavies along the way.
Yeah, I've been lucky.
Drop a name or two for people in the audience.
Well, I was on a Benny Golson record. What else? I mean, wow, now I can't think of anybody. I mean, through the years I pretty much played with, Peter Bernstein.
Oh, really? I've been listening to Peter Bernstein, actually.
Yeah, he would come down to Chris's, and I'm on a couple record dates. I think Ralph Bowen record dates with Peter. And I always like Peter.
Yeah, I think I was... Go ahead.
Yeah, but I always like Peter because he's very clear and concise with the way he plays melodies. Everything he plays...
He's a beautiful player.
He's in control. He knows exactly. He just has a control over everything he's doing, kind of. I mean, Eric Alexander. We used to back up people like Freddie Hubbard. So I was on a recording date with Freddie Hubbard. I always tell this story where at Rudy Van Gelder's, and nothing of the date ever came out. It's like Freddie Hubbard, Joe Henderson. I got to play with Joe Henderson on it. Grover Washington, and I was playing before Freddie, and the mic was like, I don't know, 3 feet for me. And then Freddie starts playing, and Rudy comes running out, pulls the mic back another like 2 feet, because Freddie was just like powerhouse. But yeah, I mean, with the big band we backed up, Joe Sudler. Back when you were around, Eric, we backed up Freddie Hubbard, Lockjaw Davis, Bob Minzer, Slide Hampton, Ronnie Cooper, who just passed away. A bunch of people.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Yes.
Bootsy. I remember seeing you with Bootsy at some point.
Bootsy all the time, yeah. Larry McKenna in Philly.
Bootsy Barnes and Larry, yeah.
Yeah, Bootsy passed away during COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and through the years, different people coming down. Chris Potter, played with Chris Potter, because
oh, wow.
Eric Alexander, and who else? There's a great guitar player on one of my records, John Patitucci. So I have a record with Patitucci and Jesse Von Roller, guitar player from Europe, great player, and Eric Harland, drummer.
That's great. Well, it's good talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too.